Viewers, and welcome to the Friday edition of the Economy and Politics Show. As you always say, thank God it's Friday. It's the weekend already beginning, but we have the conversation around the political space for today. 30th October 2020, across the world, there's some kind of celebrations called Halloween. Well, let's get down to Nigeria, which is our concern, and we'll give you a highlight of what we're looking at. But the main topic for today is the unprecedented October 2020 violence has come and gone, but what are the learning points for political leaders? Let's take a view of what we're going to discuss. First, there are renewed calls for restructuring. The second part is the need for inclusive policies. We'll take the big story in the political space this week that the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, has been reappointed for another 5 years, which means that 2023 elections, all things being equal, will be conducted by him and his team. And of course, the big NSAS protests and the learning points for politicians. And of course, an interesting side of some governors who have taken the efforts to support families of slain security officers during the recent violence that followed the NSAS protest. And a little peep into the big one next week on Tuesday, 3rd November, the US presidential election, the big elections all eyes will be watching. Let's begin with the renewed calls for restructuring. Since the return to democracy and the Fourth Republic in 1999, 2020 has marked that year, even in a new decade, at the calls for restructuring of the current socio-political system in Nigeria has witnessed huge demand and agitation across the nation. At the turn of the 60th anniversary in October 1st, 2020, elder statesmen, experts, scholars, technocrats, celebrities, and even youth leaders have in one way or the other expressed the need for Nigeria to return to true federalism. Nigeria's aspiration to become a prosperous nation, according to them, hinges on restructuring, and this has become imperative for the country. To place context recently on this issue, the senior pastor of the Latter Rain Assembly, Pastor Tunde Bakare, in the State of the Nation address, who also is a convener of the Save Nigeria group, for those that can remember, in the wake of the recent protests and the brutality of the Nigerian police formation, State Anti-Robbery Squad, and also the escalation of violence that led to wanton destruction of lives and properties, had an opportunity to share how Nigeria can rediscover itself. In his words, upon the foundation of a new Nigerian culture, we must revisit conversations around the structure of Nigeria. The NSAS protests have once again brought to the fore the diversity of the challenges and aspirations of the Nigerian people across geopolitical zones. Let me at this juncture address those young people, particularly in the north, who have taken a different position and called for reforms rather than the outright disbandment of SARS, which is a southern call. I'm referring to those who argue that they need such tactical formations to combat their peculiar security challenges in the north. First of all, I say to these young Nigerians, you have the right to air your views no matter how unpopular they may be. We hear you too because you are also Nigerians. We do not desire a nation that is intolerant of seemingly contrarian opinions, nor a nation where one cap must fit all. Instead, we desire a nation where policy ideas are debated at the policy roundtable, where facts are separated from fiction, and where the best ideas are implemented for the benefit of all, bearing the realities and opportunities of each geopolitical zone in mind. Speaking further, I said we desire a nation where policy is based on evidence and where governance decisions are preceded by thorough strategic analysis. It has become clear that an excessively centralized government cannot sustain a culture of responsive leadership and responsible citizenship. As Nigerians begin to exercise the powers of the distinguished office of the citizen, we must demand a government that is close enough to facilitate our welfare and strong enough to provide security. This is why I'm confident that the current wave of people movement and individual responsibility will ultimately lead to the restructuring of our nation. Under restructuring, which is a very key issue for the nation. So you can see clearly that if we restructure, it will accommodate all the views, and Pastor Bakare has buttressed that in that State of the Nation address. Now, the debate of restructuring is very interesting. Sometimes people ask, what are we restructuring? You hear those words sometimes. What are we even restructuring? So let's take a look at some perspectives on that restructuring. The major issues of interest from what I can deduce, first, I've always been pushing this and saying this, we need to look at the fiscal revenue distribution. The Revenue Mobilization and Fiscal Commission has over time made proposals. Teams of economists have been involved in that. It's time to implement the recommendations. And those recommendations look at states and local government getting more than the federal government. The FG current structure is 52% for federal government, 27% for states, and 21% for local governments. That has to be revisited to ensure that states and local governments are getting more. So, for example, we can say that states would take 40%, local governments 35%, and the federal government have 25%. Those are the prospects of how we can begin to review revenue distribution. Let's look at one major issue, resource control and management of resources. Nigeria has mineral resources. We're blessed with mineral resources as a country. We have them in abundance from crude oil, which is only now the major one that has been a revenue earner. But it's time to develop others, and even the North has them. Zamfara, we've heard the story of gold. This year has been big in looking at commercializing gold, and we're hearing the reports from Zamfara State. So in terms of mineral resources, states should have the right to develop and commercialize them, and they can give some proceeds to the federal government. Think about that. I mean, states will not need to go cap in hand to Abuja to ask for support and subvention. In the area of transportation, states should be involved more in terms of airports and seaports. I take example of Akwa Ibom State, where currently there's a development of the Ibom Free Trade Zone and the Baka Deep Seaport. One of the big viable projects, even tabled by the Infrastructure Concession Regulatory Commission. At the moment, it's been tabled for approval by the federal government, but in a very effective fiscal federalism, restructured polity. All a state like Akwa Ibom needs to do is develop that port case study and this best case, and of course, see how it can attract investments. The federal government looks at it, and of course, once revenue comes in, they get the share of it, but the ball goes to the states. It's very important because unnecessary waiting for bureaucratic processes from the federal doesn't help a lot of states to unlock their potentials. Lagos till now doesn't have a special status, despite the fact that the same party is in leadership in the state and the federal. Those are things that we'll have to look at for consideration. So airports, seaports, we have to look at the exclusive and the concurrent list and explore once again the revenues that come into states. Education, we understand, yes, unity is very important in Nigeria. Unity schools over the years have continued to be the rallying point, which is okay for sustenance. We have state schools, state universities and all that, but more of these allocations coming to states becomes very important, and local government, not federal government controlling more. One very important area that must be explored is the power infrastructure. States should be able to have the capability, and again, we don't look at that exclusively. States should be able to develop their power and make it in a way that citizens can access. We appreciate the renewable energy policy, but states can also develop their power. Independent power projects, particularly in South-South, have occurred, various states, but the challenges of approval has come on board, and that is something that we must take seriously if we're going to really achieve this restructuring. And then, of course, the major issue too is our security architecture. Think about it. Why would people be protesting at Alausa, the government house of Lagos State, and telling the governor, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu, that they need to reform SARS? This Special Anti-Robbery Squad is a federal formation. If it was fully under the states, as we're seeing the provisions being made now, definitely the governor can really take quick action. So state police is a very important aspect that must be taken seriously. Like a federal system like the US, you have the federal police and state police. So for example, if you go to the US, you have the LAPD, Los Angeles Police Department. You have the New York Police Department, NYPD. So we need to come to that agreement to ensure that we achieve security. For now, we're looking at community policing, but we have to come to that place where we fully equip states to manage security. Because the events of the last weeks show that it is inevitable that we need to take it to that level of restructuring. Now, restructuring doesn't mean usurping power or insurrection or anything. Sometimes people misunderstand this. It's about ensuring that there's a devolution of powers and that our unity is strengthened in our diversity. Let's go to another very interesting, important impact assessment from our political system, which is the need for inclusive policies. The recent looting of palliatives, those of you that watched it, it was very unbelievable, shocking. Meant to caution the adverse impact of the COVID-19 pandemic on Nigerians, brought to the fore the teething challenges that we face, particularly for a country that is now seeing, with all managing effective economy, we're seeing poor leadership from the current political class, weak governance and poor leadership. From the executive to the legislature at the federal to state level, they have to all take responsibility, including local government chairmen, that there has been some failure in terms of effective policy implementation and communication. And this is not a time for federal and states to be throwing blames at themselves. There must be this collective admission that they failed in terms of managing the whole palliatives and distribution to Nigerian citizens. I don't support looting in any way. It was terrible. What we saw in Lagos, in Cross River, in over 18, 19 states of the Federation showed that beyond rhetorics, there is a wide gulf between Nigeria's leadership and the citizens. That wide gulf calls for action. It shows that there is need for leadership and consideration of the plight of Nigerians. And that also brings to the fore that there's even the excuse from the Nigerian Governors Forum and even the legislators that they were planning to distribute the palliatives will not still go down well with the citizens because there's now a trust deficit that has to be regained. But one thing is clear. With rising poverty over 40%, unemployment rate of 27.1%, weak economic growth of -6.1%, and an imminent recession in the third quarter of 2020, rising inflation of 13.2%, and an alarming misery index of over 50%, Nigeria is in dire need of inclusive policies from a compassionate leadership. The 9th National Assembly have a key role to play in achieving these people-oriented policies and legislations. We are aware that they're looking at the Constitution Review Committee, looking at the Constitution, which is very good, but we need to see more action from that part, not just the House of Reps, but Senate. The spate of violence across the country was an expression of the frustration that the lower class of Nigerians have experienced from deprivation to exclusion in socio-economic programs. That is a clear message which we hope the political leadership will respond and change their tactics and approach. Let's go to 2023. It's a big, this is 2020, but already 3 years to the election, next elections, people are talking a lot about it. And President Mahmood Buhari this week approved the appointment of Professor Mahmood Yakubu as the chairman of the Independent National Electoral Commission to serve for another 5 years. That's what we call a second term for him. In essence, Professor Mahmood Yakubu, after screening by the Senate, will conduct another defining general election in 2023 before his tenure expires. From history, since 1999, we've had 2 former Independent National Electoral Commission chairmen, Professor Mahmood Yakubu and Professor Ottoabasi Abasiekong. They also served 2 terms and conducted 2 elections respectively. For Professor Mahmood Yakubu, 2003, 2007 general elections. Professor Ottoabasi Abasiekong conducted the 2011 and 2015 general elections. The major expectations for Nigerians is that the signing of the Electoral Act will be done because that will strengthen e-voting, a seamless voter registration and election process, And we hope that President Buhari would put pen to paper on that. The road to 2022 is already gaining traction as young Nigerians are pushing for a democratic platform that can mobilize them to emerge a strong political force that can transform the country's socio-political landscape. So the build-up to 2020 has already begun, and there's a lot to watch how it will play out. But the major story, of course, is that Professor Mahmood Yakubu will be conducting that election once he's cleared by the Senate. Now let's get to the learning points for the Nigerian political class from this recent EndSARS protest. There are not much of them, but the first learning point is that it's no longer business as usual. The era of talking and not practicalizing is over. So you can make promises, but we now have awakened electorates that are going to be monitoring and seeking for accountability and transparency. The last 3 weeks has been interesting, with various political leaders being called out from social media. Little wonder some people are trying to push for the regulation of the social media. But Nigeria is a democracy, so we'll continue in that regard. But another important part, of course, is the issue of talk and do. We need to have a talk and do political class. The issue of the Special Anti-Robbery Squad protests was a result of the fact that for 2 or 3 years, we kept hearing that they have been disbanded, they will be reformed, but nothing happened. And so one of the big achievements of this protest was the fact that the president, after receiving the 545 demands from the protesters from Governor Babajide Sanwo-Olu, engaged the vice president, and they inaugurated judicial commission. So far, at least over 16 states have done that, and they're already sitting, and they're beginning to accept petitions and experiences of victims. That wouldn't have really happened quickly if we did not have a very robust, resolved group agitating and demanding for change. But that shouldn't happen. That's the responsibility that should be from the government to even the security forces. Also, communicating with citizens has to improve. It showed very well that there's a wide gulf from the palliatives management to other issues, and that has to change going forward. And yes, we've seen some leaders crying, but beyond tears, we need pragmatism. It's okay to cry. I mean, President Obama has cried over the killings of people with guns and the issue of violence, but made a move in terms of reforming the law. So people can cry as leaders, governor, president, anyone, senator, but we need to see pragmatism, and that's the major thing. Beyond the cries, beyond the tears. So it's not a bad thing. We're humans. I mean, a president can break down, cry. A governor can break down, cry. Senator, legislator, anyone in political leadership. But after crying, we need to see action. We need to see pragmatism that connects with the people. And talk about pragmatism and connecting with the people. This protest, the violence that followed it, several security forces, the police particularly, were affected. Several of them were killed across the country. They lost their lives, and even some soldiers. And some governors showed compassion, which is part of what should be done. Governor Nyesom Wike really touched a lot of Nigerians. I mean, when he announced 20 million naira donation to each family member of security officers that were killed in the Unyigbo disaster, the violence there. That is compassion. That is identifying with the fact that the police force play a very key role in the country, and people who have served and lost their lives, their service should not go in vain. And that was a very good one from Governor Nyesom Wike of Rivers State. In Lagos State, Mr. Babajide Sanwo-Olu announced that the children of all police officers that lost their lives during the protest and violence will be awarded scholarships to university level. They are now going to be integrated in the Lagos State's scholarship program. So they will be having free education covered by Lagos State to university level, because they should not be destitute or abandoned because their fathers died in active service to the nation. That is compassion. That is connecting with the people. Those are things that leaders do to show that they appreciate the effort and sacrifice of forces members. And Of course, the security trust fund set up by the president, initiatives like that should help to also support security officials, particularly those who have lost their lives. And Nigeria has to do a lot in that regard. A lot of security officials have lost their lives in this period of the Armed Forces Remembrance Day. As we remember the armed forces and all those who sacrificed fighting the war or preserving territorial integrity, we must do a lot in terms of insurance and funding to support them. Those that have lost their lives, their families should not suffer because their fathers stood up for the nation, serving the country. And let's go on to the very big one. Next week, of course, the global markets, the global economies will be watching the US. The United States of America, of course, we all know is the most powerful nation in the globe. And it will be deciding who will lead the nation for the next 4 years. If you watch all the global markets now, you will see that the signals are there, all waiting to see what's going to happen. It's a traditional two-horse race between incumbent President Donald Trump of the Republican Party and the Senator Joe Biden of the Democratic Party, who was former vice president under President Barack Obama. This is a record election, as over 70 million Americans have already participated in the polls. It's interesting because of the mail voting and the innovations that have come in, and this is going to be historic. WebTV on its own part will be monitoring the developments, particularly on Tuesday, November 3rd, 2020. And of course, you know why this is important. The US is one of the big Nigerians' trading partners and allies. So whoever is the president have to see what is in store in terms of foreign policy. President Donald Trump has served 4 years, and of course, there's been a lot around his policy towards Africa. So the big question is, what will be the new shift if Trump wins the election, or if Joe Biden coming in as president? Their policies towards Africa will remain very important. Business industrialists and African investor, Mr. Tony Lumelu, said what we need more from the US and the West is partnership, not aid. So we need to see more action and steps from the leadership in the US in terms of partnerships with Nigeria and Africa, particularly next year as the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement takes effect. But one of the big policies I can say about the US to Africa was in 2000 when President William Jefferson Clinton, visited, came to Nigeria. And he made that point on the Africa Growth Opportunity Act, AGOA, opportunity for Africa to boost their production, agri-products, commodities, but add value to them so that they can export and create value. How has Africa harnessed the AGOA? That's one very important area that we must look at. And in my article 4 years ago on the Trump presidency, I said, how Africa harnesses AGOA will be an opportunity to engage the US in the new dispensation. But all the same, we will be watching to see how this election turns out, because America has been a template of democracy. Will they continue in that regard to show example to the world? That is something we all have to watch out for. And so it has been a very interesting week of events and activities across the globe, and we just thank you for being part of the show for the week, our Economy and Politics show. But we would like you to send your views and comments to news@prochange.com. I know a lot of Nigerians, you want to share what you think the political class should be doing more now. I mean, the NSAS protest has shown some of the agitations. There are issues around restructuring. There's a need for inclusive policies. There's a need for more compassionate leadership. But what are the other issues you would like to bring to the fore to the political class to take seriously? Because the game has changed for Nigeria. I mean, according to Professor Mahmood, we have a young generation that have a global tribe, and you saw that across the globe. This NSAS protest was across the globe, digital social media. So you can no longer take them for granted. Send your views and we would receive and respond to them appropriately. You can also follow us on our platforms at WebTV NG, at EcoPolitics NG, and at ProShare for updates on the economy and politics space. If you go to our website, www.prochange.com, and click on it, go to the right hand of the bar, you will see the discussions. We have a segment for politics, and we have a segment for the Nigerian economy. Rich contents you can get facts analysis from and learn from. Thank you for being part of us, this show this week. Till we come your way again, thank you for watching. Have a nice day. Great weekend ahead, and stay safe.